Good evening and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. On this President's Day, we're going to take a look at the political fallout from the second impeachment of Donald Trump and how his acquittal is going to play out for both the Democrats and the Republicans. What is next for the Republican Party? Are they still the party of Trump and his lackeys like Lindsey Graham, or is McConnell going to win hearts and minds after he went after Trump, albeit after he voted to acquit? And how about Democrats? Now, they didn't get witnesses, but did they bloody Trump and his enablers enough to consider this one a political victory? Plus, what would the founding fathers have said about the second impeachment of Donald Trump, what he did and whether or not it merited Senate basically for saying enough is enough? We don't have to guess. A top historian, he'll tell us what they said and how it applies to Trump today. But we start with the nursing home scandal in the state of New York. A couple hours ago, Governor Andrew Cuomo responded to the latest developments that are making national news.
To be clear, all the deaths in the nursing homes and in the hospitals were always fully, publicly, and accurately reported. The numbers were the numbers, always. People did request information beyond the place of death. Everyone was busy. Everybody was here every day. We're in the midst of managing a pandemic. There was a delay in providing the press and the public all that additional information.
Cuomo responding to the latest reporting that puts his top lieutenant, Melissa DeRosa, at the center of the story now. In a leaked phone call where DeRosa was discussing the data on nursing home deaths, she said, quote, "Basically, we froze. We were in a position where we weren't sure if what we were going to give to the Department of Justice or what we gave to you guys, meaning legislators, and what we start saying was going to be used against us, and we weren't sure if there was going to be an investigation." Well, that's launched allegations of a cover-up at the top levels of the Cuomo administration. Now, Republicans in New York and also some Democrats are saying we need not just more transparency, but accountability. In fact, some are even arguing they want to impeach Governor Cuomo on the Republican side. Plus, more than a dozen Democrats want to strip Cuomo of his emergency powers to deal with the COVID pandemic. This whole thing started when Letitia James, the state attorney general, who's also, by the way, a Cuomo ally, or at least was, issued a report that was critical of how the nursing homes have been handled during the pandemic. Key takeaway from that report? It is an undercount of deaths at nursing homes. It's important to note that the total death count that hit nearly 43,000 at the time of the report 2 weeks ago, it is accurate, but some 3,800 deaths of nursing home residents had been listed as hospital deaths, not nursing home deaths. And we now know nearly 13,000 residents of long-term care facilities have lost their lives due to COVID. Take a listen to how the governor responded to that during a recent COVID briefing.
Whether a person died in a hospital or died in a nursing home, it's the people died. I wish none of it happened. I wish there was no COVID. I wish no old people died.
Other findings from the AG's report: more than 3,600 residents who tested positive were returned to the nursing homes after they got treated at the hospital. And that speaks to two other findings in the report. New COVID rules from state lawmakers led to confusion among nursing home operators, and some facilities didn't take the proper precautions to deal with the COVID positive residents. My next guest, he's been covering this story from the very beginning. Jesse McKinley is the Albany bureau chief at the New York Times. And there was some acknowledgement, I thought, Jesse, from the governor that mistakes were made, but not nearly enough to satisfy some of the outstanding questions. And there definitely seems to be a gap from what his top lieutenant, Ms. DeRosa, had to say versus what he said. She apologized to lawmakers for putting them, as she said, in a terrible position. She said, as I mentioned, they froze the administration. The governor said, no, legislators got everything. I don't know what they're talking about. They weren't kept in the dark here. We had to take care of the feds first. There's definitely not consistency with those two accounts.
Yeah, I think what you're going to run into here, Richard, is a timeline problem. Keep in mind what the governor has been saying, what Melissa DeRosa said last week was, look, we were freaked out because we thought the feds were going to investigate us. We had to prioritize that. And then we told the state lawmakers that they were going to get their data, but they just have to wait. Now, that all makes sense, except when you look at the calendar, in the request from the federal government came in late August. The Cuomo administration responded a couple of weeks later. So now we're talking early September, and the data didn't come out, was not released to the public nor lawmakers until late January, early February. So you're still talking a 6-month lag. So while the governor said today, look, there was a delay, we were buried, we had a lot of work going on, we weren't vacationing in the south of France. All of that may be true, but there was still 6 months between the time that they gave some data to the federal government and then finally coughed up data to state authorities here in New York, after Tish James's report.
There was another statement the governor made, which is, listen, the spread that happened to these nursing homes had nothing to do with the patients that were brought there. These were staffers that were coming in and out of the hospital. How does he know that, Jesse?
Well, he had a report that was written by his own health department, which asserted that. And, I've talked to some sources, and I don't think that is a completely uncredible argument that some of those cases were spread by the nursing home workers going back into those facilities. But the problem here is one of optics, right? It's that he has steadfastly said that there was no spread as a result, or very little spread as a result of nursing home patients returning into nursing homes after contracting COVID. And I think just on its face, people have questioned that. And as he said today, they were not forthcoming with the data for months and months and months. And that created a void. And into that void, not only did political arguments begin to circulate that Cuomo was responsible for all these deaths in nursing homes, but also just common sense questions began to emerge as to, why won't the data come out? So this is kind of it's a scandal of his own making in that he did not act to kind of quash these rumors, these conspiracy theories, as he referred to them today, and now is facing kind of fairly substantial political fallout.
Well, I want to get to the consequences, but you put your finger on it. Listen, there are many political skills this governor has, and in many ways they were put on display throughout this crisis. However, he has always had a blind spot where he won't accept if there's a fault that he'll fall on the sword for it. He's had, by my count, Jesse, at least 3 or 4 opportunities to do cleanup on aisle 9 on this, but he perpetuates the problem. Also, Melissa DeRosa has been phenomenal through this process. For her to have those comments to the legislators and not expect the thing was going to get out, I have been shocked that some of the, not the easiest part of it, but manageable things. People didn't expect perfection in the middle of a pandemic, but not to accept at multiple opportunities that they made errors or they should have shared information with more transparency. The inability to do that is part of the reason why we are where we are.
And I think if you talk to people inside of Governor Cuomo's orbit, they're probably not saying anything different, and the governor almost said as much today. He was pressed by Mike Gormley, the excellent reporter from New York Newsday, said, look, are you going to apologize? Can you say the words apologize? And he didn't quite get there. He said, I take responsibility. He said, mistakes were made, basically, not so many words. Had we had a chance to do it again, we would have done it differently. But he never actually said, I apologize and I'm sorry about this. And I think that is telling. I think it shows you that he actually thinks that, to a large extent, this was almost a messaging problem, that he should have gotten out in front of this beforehand. He should have put out better data. He should have been quicker to respond to political attacks and or factual attacks. And that's got him in the mess he is right now. And speaking of which, when you say it's, clean up on aisle 9, it's kind of the whole grocery store at this point. He's got a lot of people that just simply don't buy his version of this. And I don't think that his performance today is going to put out any fires.
And he was asked at one point if there should be a probe into this. And he says, well, for what? There's nothing to learn. You know everything. And I think the argument that he has unimpeachable credibility, it's a little tough for many to swallow. Now, this idea, and I know you talked about the toxicity that was out there as if this was just a partisan attack, and I know there's several Republicans who took him to the woodshed that may even be theoretically opponents next November. Democrats, too, in real time. You saw this, Jesse. You got the Speaker of the Assembly, Hasty, saying, I don't know what he's talking about. They shared with us this information. I didn't see it. What are the chances here that his emergency powers could be stripped by the legislature?
I think it's not inconceivable, but not likely imminently. You know, I think that probably, oddly enough, the Senate, which for a long time was run by Republicans, has actually almost been more kind of progressively minded on this, if that's a fair observation. They've been pushing more to kind of hold the governor accountable, kind of from the left wing of that party, whereas the Assembly's, I feel, has been a little bit more measured. But that being said, you know, it is not inconceivable, but it's also an interesting situation in that the emergency powers were not really at the heart of this problem. You know, it was not that he, you know, overstepped and closed down, you know, hospitals and no one agreed, and that has resulted in this problem for him. This was a basic government function. You know, this was just putting out the data and letting people know what the facts were, and that's where he's fallen down. So if they do revoke the emergency powers, which once again I'm not necessarily betting on, if they do try to do that, it's a censure, but it's not necessarily, you know, focused on what caused this problem for him.
Finally, Jesse, do you think this administration, this governor particularly, fully grasp that this is not just nagging reporters looking for a story? He's got a real problem here and he's going to handle this differently going forward? Or is it going to be the same MO here and he won't give an inch?
I think he hoped that today's press conference, which was 90 minutes, it was not short, and he returned to this, and you know, he did have empathy in his voice and did say, I'm sorry for creating pain and things like that. I think he hopes that went a long ways to kind of putting this to bed. We'll see. You know, I think in 8 years of covering the governor, he has had certain outbreaks of bad news and bad news cycles. But this last 2 weeks, between Tish James's report, between some of our reporting in the New York Times, between the New York Post reporting on this last week, this has been a really bad stretch for him. And I think he's hoping to ride it out pretty quickly, but we'll see.
We shall see. Jesse, as always, I appreciate a few minutes. Thank you so much.
Of course.
All right, folks, when we come back, the other huge story. 7 Republican senators voted to convict Donald Trump, and they are now facing huge repercussions within their own home states and more specifically, their own home parties. We're going to spend the next couple of segments discussing how each party looks coming out of the latest impeachment drama. Who won, who lost, and does Trumpism still have legs?